The rain fell on Bletchley Park in a persistent, grey drizzle, matching the mood of the place exactly. It was a peculiar patch of England, a jumble of hastily erected huts and a sprawling Victorian mansion, all shrouded in a secrecy so profound that even the bird songs seemed hushed. To Elara Vance, standing at the edge of the drive with a single leather suitcase in hand, it felt less like a secret weapon and more like a slightly dilapidated boarding school for the intellectually unhinged. She adjusted her glasses, the world snapping into sharper focus. The mansion, Bletchley Park itself, was a study in contradictions, imposing yet fragile, its red brick darkened by the damp. This was where the war was being fought not with bullets, but with brains. And Elara's brain was her primary, her only weapon. At 26, she was one of the finest cryptanalysts in Britain, a fact known to a vanishingly small number of people, most of whom were now in this compound. She had been plucked from a quiet, dusty fellowship at Cambridge, where she'd been content to deconstruct dead languages and thrust into the heart of the living, breathing, and most deadly language of all, the encrypted communications of the Third Reich. Hut 8 smelled of damp wool, stale cigarette smoke, and the faint, metallic tang of the bomb machines, clattering, whirring beasts that were the closest thing they had to a key for the German Enigma cipher. The air hummed with a low-grade panic, a constant, unspoken race against time. Every minute a code went unbroken could mean a ship sunk, a city bombed, lives lost. Elara found her station, a small desk piled with intercepts and her own notebooks, filled with elegant, spidery script that belied the chaotic nature of the work. She had barely shrugged off her coat when the head of the hut, a man named Pembroke with the perpetually worried expression of a sheepdog, approached her.
Vance.
Good you're here. He lowered his voice. We have a new problem. Or rather, an old problem with a new layer of complexity. The U-boat Enigma traffic? Elara asked, her mind already racing through the latest naval intercepts. The Battle of the Atlantic was bleeding Britain dry, and the U-boats were the scalpels.
Worse.
Or better. We've intercepted a new signal pattern, piggybacking on the standard naval Enigma. We're calling it Lorelei. It's fragmented, highly specialized. Intelligence believes it's being used to coordinate something high-level, a specific, high-value naval movement. Perhaps even a personal command for one of their Grand Admirals. Elara's interest was piqued. A cipher within a cipher. A ghost in the machine. And the bomb. The bomb gives us the daily settings, but Lorelei has its own internal key. It's a manual lock on a digital door. We need a human touch. Your touch. Pembroke shifted uncomfortably. There's more. MI6 is involved. They're sending one of their operatives. To liaise. To provide context. Elara's lips tightened. Context? We provide the intelligence. They act on it. The chain is clear. Not this time. This is too sensitive. The intelligence from Lorelei, if we can break it, will need immediate, on-the-ground verification and action. This agent is to be your direct link. You break it, he runs with it.
No bureaucratic delays.
Before Elara could protest further, the door to Hut 8 opened, letting in a gust of damp, cold air and a man who seemed carved from the same elements. He was tall, with a lean frame encased in a trench coat that had seen better days. His hair was dark, unruly, and his face was all sharp angles and shadows, with a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. But it was his eyes that arrested her, a cool, dispassionate gray, the color of the North Sea in winter. They swept the room, assessing, dismissing, in a single glance. Pembroke straightened up.
Ah.
Right on time. Elara Vance, this is Captain Alistair Finch. Me 6. Alistair Finch's gaze landed on her. There was no warmth in it, no professional courtesy. It was the look a mechanic might give a complicated and possibly faulty piece of machinery. Miss Vance, he said, his voice a low baritone, roughened by what she suspected was whiskey and smoke. He didn't offer a hand. Captain, she replied, her tone crisp, academic. Finch will be briefed on your progress, Pembroke said, his unease palpable. He'll help you understand what to look for, what patterns might be militarily significant beyond the raw decrypt. Finch gave a curt nod. I'm here to translate genius into action. To make sure your pretty patterns on paper actually mean something in the real world, where people are dying. The condescension was a spark to tinder. Elara felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. These pretty patterns, Captain, have saved countless lives. They are the reason convoys make it across the Atlantic. They are the reason our pilots are in the right place at the right time. I assure you, their meaning is quite clear to those of us who understand them. A ghost of a smile, utterly devoid of humor, touched Finch's lips. I'm sure they are, but understanding a code and understanding the enemy are two different things. I'm here for the latter. He pulled up a chair, uninvited, and sat at the edge of her desk, his presence an intrusion into her ordered world of numbers and letters. He smelled of rain, damp wool, and a faint, spicy cologne that was entirely out of place in the hut. So, show me, Miss Vance. Show me these ghosts you're chasing. The first week was a study in mutual aggravation. Elara worked in focused, intense silence, her world narrowing to the flow of cipher text on the page, the rhythmic click-clack of the bomb in the background, the scent of her own tea going cold. Finch was a disruption. He paced. He smoked pungent French cigarettes that made her eyes water. He asked questions that she found infuriatingly simplistic. Why does this group of letters repeat here? He'd ask, pointing a calloused finger at her notes. Because it's a standardized greeting, likely Heil Hitler, she'd reply, her patience fraying. It's a crib, a known piece of plaintext that helps us find the initial settings. And this fragmented part at the end. That's Lorelei. It's not a standard military report. It's shorter, more precise. Coordinates, timings, identifiers. It's elegant and maddening. He would grunt, unsatisfied. His methods were alien to her. While she looked for mathematical purity, for the logical flaws in the Enigma's seemingly perfect system, he looked for human weakness. He brought her dossiers on German naval commanders, their habits, their personalities, their known vices. Admiral Schmidt is a pedant. He likes everything in triplicate. Look for patterns of 3. Commander Weber is arrogant. He might use his own name as a cipher key. Try Weber. This one, he said, sliding a grainy photograph of a severe-looking man with a monocle, is Admiral von Holtz. He's old guard, Prussian aristocracy. He quotes Schiller. Look for poetic fragments. It felt like superstition, like trying to solve a quadratic equation by reading tea leaves. She dismissed it, retreating deeper into her numbers. Their conversations were clipped, functional, and laden with unspoken disdain. He saw her as a naive academic, a brain in a jar, disconnected from the brutal reality of the war she was helping to fight. She saw him as a blunt instrument, a cynical thug who thought human intuition could outperform mathematical certainty. The pressure mounted. The Lorelei signals were increasing in frequency. The intelligence from other sources was grim. A major naval assembly was suspected, a potential knockout blow against Allied shipping. Bletchley was a pressure cooker, and Elara and Finch were trapped inside it together. One late night, long after most of the other codebreakers had retired to their billeted quarters, Elara remained. The hut was silent save for the ticking of the clock and the scratch of her pen. She was close. She could feel it. The pattern was emerging, a fragile, crystalline structure in her mind. Finch was there too, slumped in a chair, a glass of amber liquid, procured from God knows where, in his hand. The dim light softened the harsh lines of his face, making him look tired, not just cynical. You should sleep, he said, his voice quieter than usual, the gravelly tone more pronounced. I can't, she murmured, not looking up. It's here. I just can't see it. He stood and walked over, looking down at her work. He didn't speak for a long moment. You see the world in patterns no one else can see, don't you? He said, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his voice. It was a simple observation. Surprised, she glanced up. Their eyes met, and the professional barrier between them thinned, just for a second. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by the ghosts of unbroken codes, he wasn't just an MI6 agent. He was a man, burdened and weary. And she wasn't just a codebreaker. She was a woman, isolated and carrying the weight of countless unseen lives. "It's all there in the chaos," she said softly. "The Germans, they believe in order, in the machine's perfection. But the machine is operated by men. And men are flawed. They get lazy. They repeat things. They love, they hate, they boast. That's the flaw in the system. That's the crack we pry open." Finch was silent for a moment, then pointed to a sequence in her notes. This fragment. Rheingold. It's come up twice now in the Lorelei layer. Rheingold, Elara whispered. The word resonated. It was from Wagner's opera, part of the Ring cycle. A treasure, a prize.
Von Holz.
You said he was cultured. A Wagner enthusiast? It's in his file, Finch said, his focus intensifying. He attended Bayreuth every year before the war. A spark leapt between them, no longer of animosity, but of pure, intellectual synergy. Elara's mathematical mind and Finch's human intelligence suddenly aligned. She began scribbling furiously, applying the concept of Rheingold as a possible key, cross-referencing it with the known Enigma settings for the day. It's not the main key, it's a modifier, a shift cipher within the already decrypted text, she muttered, her pen flying across the paper. Finch watched her, his usual cynicism replaced by a dawning respect. He saw the fierce concentration on her face, the absolute mastery in her movements. He wasn't just looking at a brain, he was looking at an artist. And then, it happened. The numbers and letters rearranged themselves on the page, shifting from incomprehensible gibberish into clean, stark German.
Rheingold erfolgreich. Treffpunkt Delta. 2314:00 Uhr. Ende.
Elara read it aloud, her voice trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Rheingold successful. Rendezvous point Delta. 23rd, 1400 hours. End. Finch was already moving, grabbing his coat. The 23rd. That's tomorrow. Rendezvous point Delta. We have a list of suspected grid references. He looked at her, and his gray eyes were alight with a fierce, cold fire. You've done it, Vance. In that moment, the triumph was shared. The wall between them had a crack, and through it, a sliver of light had entered. The decrypted message triggered a whirlwind. Finch disappeared into the night, taking the intelligence to his handlers. Elara was debriefed by Pembroke and a series of increasingly senior and stern-faced men from the War Office. She was praised, but the praise was hushed, secret. There would be no medal, no public recognition. Her victory would be, like all her work, invisible.
She didn't care.
The thrill of the break, the sheer intellectual triumph, was enough. Or so she told herself. But as the hours passed and Finch did not return, a strange anxiety gnawed at her. She had grown used to his disruptive presence. The hut felt empty, without his brooding energy. He returned 2 days later, just as the dawn was breaking. He looked haggard, his coat stained, a fresh cut on his cheekbone. He found her at her desk, where she had essentially been living, subsisting on tea and biscuits. He pulled up his chair and sat, the earlier moment of connection seeming like a distant dream. His cynicism was back, but it seemed darker now, heavier. Well? Elara asked, unable to contain herself. We acted on it, he said flatly, lighting a cigarette. The rendezvous was for a U-boat to transfer Admiral von Holtz himself to a new command ship. We were waiting. We sunk the U-boat and the escort vessel. Elara's heart leapt. That's wonderful.
Von Holtz's.
Von Holtz wasn't on the U-boat, Finch interrupted, his voice hollow. It was a decoy. A clever, bloody decoy. He was on another ship 50 miles away, watching. He knew we were listening. Lorelei was a trap. He sacrificed 2 of his own ships and 100 men to confirm his suspicions that his communications were compromised. The triumph curdled in Elara's stomach, turning to ash. She felt physically sick. 100 men.
Dead.
Because of her work. Because she had been so proud, so sure of her breakthrough. He played us, Finch said, his gaze boring into her. He used your brilliance against you. Against us. He fed us a victory and made us pay for it in blood and, more importantly, in security. Now he knows for certain that we're breaking Enigma. He'll change everything. All our progress, it could be set back months. Years. The weight of it crushed her. This was the reality Finch had always spoken of. It wasn't about pretty patterns. It was about lives. It was about an enemy who was just as clever, just as ruthless. She had been so focused on the code as a mathematical problem, she had forgotten it was a weapon in the hands of a thinking, adaptable foe. I didn't, she stammered, tears of shame and frustration welling in her eyes. She turned away, furiously wiping them. To her surprise, Finch's tone softened. Don't, he said. Don't blame yourself. Blame him. And blame me. I'm the one who's supposed to understand the enemy. I should have seen the double bluff. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he placed it over hers on the desk. It was warm, rough, grounding. The contact was electric. It was the first time he had touched her. This changes nothing, Vance, he said, his voice low. He's won this round. But the game isn't over. He's arrogant. He's shown us his hand. He can't resist communicating. He'll use Lorelei again. And next time, we'll be ready. Elara looked up at him, at the grim determination in his eyes. The professional rivalry was gone, burned away in the fire of this shared failure. In its place was something else, a partnership forged in mutual respect and a shared burden. She saw the weight he carried, the dirty, morally ambiguous decisions he had to make in the shadows. And he saw the immense, lonely pressure she endured, the responsibility of knowing that a single misstep in her calculations could have catastrophic consequences. Their hands remained linked for a long moment, a silent pact made in the cold, gray light of dawn. The dilemma was no longer just about breaking a code. It was about trust. It was about learning to speak each other's language, not of ciphers and espionage, but of vulnerability and understanding. The atmosphere in Hut 8 changed. The failure with the Lorelei decoy hung over them like a pall, but for Elara and Finch, it was a catalyst. The barriers were down. The sniping ceased, replaced by a deep, focused collaboration. Elara now actively sought Finch's insights. She created a profile for Admiral von Holtz, piecing together his personality from the fragments Finch provided. His pride, his love of Wagner, his tactical cunning, his disdain for what he saw as the brutishness of the Nazi regime, even as he served it. He's an artist, Finch mused one evening as they pored over new intercepts. War is his canvas. This isn't just about winning for him. It's about winning with style, with a statement. The Lorelei decoy, that was a masterpiece to him. So we look for the artistry, Elara said, her mind making new connections. The flourish, the vanity. Days turned into a week. The pressure was immense. They knew von Holtz was planning something bigger. The regular Enigma traffic showed unusual naval movements in the North Atlantic. A major operation was imminent. But the key details were locked inside Lorelei, which had gone silent after the decoy incident. Von Holtz was being cautious. Then, a breakthrough. A new Lorelei signal, shorter than ever. It contained only 2 words, buried in a standard weather report. Walkür. 12. Elara isolated it immediately. Walkür.
Valkyrie.
Another Wagner reference. And Zwölf. 12. Finch was on his feet, pulling out maps of the Atlantic. Valkyrie, they choose which heroes live and die. He's designating a target.
Or a time. 12.
Noon, the 12th of the month? A grid reference. They worked through the night, a frantic, desperate dance. Elara ran mathematical models, applying WWII as a key, testing it against different cipher methods. Finch cross-referenced every known Allied convoy designation, every operation codename. It was Elara who saw it. It's not a time or a place. It's an identifier. Convoy WS-12. Winston's Specials. They're troop ships, Finch, carrying thousands of American soldiers to Britain. It's the lifeline. The horror of it dawned on them. Von Holtz wasn't just targeting supply ships. He was aiming to slaughter Allied soldiers before they even reached the front, a blow that could shatter the burgeoning alliance and public morale. "We have to get this out," Finch said, his face pale.
Now.
But Elara held up a hand.
Wait.
It's too obvious. He's done this before. The decoy. What if this is another one? What if he wants us to divert all our naval protection to WS-12, leaving the real target exposed? Finch stared at her, impressed by her cunning. She was thinking like Von Holtz now. She had entered the mind of the enemy. "Then what's the real target?" he asked. Elara's eyes went back to the message. "WWII, they don't just choose who dies. They choose who is worthy of Valhalla. It's an honor." Her breath caught. Oh, God. He's not after a convoy. He's after a person. Finch's eyes widened. He scrambled for a different file. The passenger manifest for WS-12. There's a special diplomatic envoy on board. A key American general, part of the Joint Command planning. But that's still the convoy. "No," Elara whispered, a terrible clarity descending upon her. She pointed to the word Zwolf. "What if it's not 12? What if it's a code within our own code? What if he knows we've broken the basic Enigma and is using our own knowledge against us?" Zwolf, the 12th letter of the alphabet, is L.
Eh?
Finch's mind raced. L for London?
Liverpool.
L for Lusitania, Elara said, her voice trembling. The room went cold. The Lusitania, a passenger ship whose sinking by a U-boat in the First World War had drawn America into the conflict. Von Holtz wasn't just planning a tactical strike. He was planning a historical echo, a propaganda coup designed to demoralize and terrify. "There's a ship," Finch said, his voice grim as death. "The SS Atlantic Star. A luxury liner repurposed as a troop ship. It's making a fast, solo run, ahead of the convoy. Carrying, God, it's carrying several hundred VIPs, including senior American officers and British politicians. It's a ghost ship. Its route is the most closely guarded secret in the Admiralty." "He knows," Elara said. "And he's going to sink it. And he's going to call it WWII. His Valkyrie, choosing the most heroic targets for his Valhalla." They had the truth, but it was a race against time. The Atlantic Star was already at sea. The Lorelei signal was hours old. Finch grabbed the decrypted message. "I have to go. I have to get this to the highest level. We have to reroute that ship, send a destroyer screen, anything." He turned to leave, then stopped, looking back at Elara. In his eyes was no longer just respect, but something deeper, more profound. A raw, unguarded admiration and fear. "Elara," he said, using her first name for the first time. It sounded like a confession. "If this works, you've just saved thousands. Again." Then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Elara stood alone in the silent hut, the weight of the world on her shoulders. But this time, the weight felt different. It was shared. She thought of his hand on hers, the sound of her name on his lips, and she realized with a jolt that the most complex code she had ever encountered wasn't German. It was Alistair Finch. The 48 hours that followed were the longest of Elara's life. Bletchley Park was a fortress of tension. She was confined to the premises, the secrecy around the Atlantic Star operation absolute. She heard nothing from Finch. The silence was deafening. She tried to work on other codes, but her focus was shattered. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw a ship sinking in icy waters. She saw Finch's face, etched with worry. She replayed their moments together, The initial hostility, the slow-burning respect, the electric touch of his hand, the way he'd said her name. She was no longer just a codebreaker working with an agent. She was a woman terrified for a man she had come to what? Care for? The realization was as unsettling as any cipher. It introduced a variable her logical mind couldn't easily compute. On the morning of the third day, as she sat staring blankly at a sheet of meaningless numbers, the door to Hut 8 opened. Alistair Finch stood there. He looked like he had been to hell and back. His clothes were rumpled, his face gaunt with exhaustion, but his gray eyes, when they found hers, held a light she had never seen in them before. A light of pure, unadulterated victory, and something else, something warmer. The entire hut fell silent, all work ceasing as every codebreaker watched. Finch walked slowly towards her desk, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't say a word until he was standing right in front of her. "The Atlantic Star," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "is safe. It was rerouted. A wolf pack of U-boats was waiting at its original coordinates. We ambushed them instead. We sank 3. The rest scattered." A collective, held breath was released in the hut. A few people began to clap, softly, then the sound grew. It was a rare, open moment of triumph in their secret war. Elara couldn't speak. She could only look at him, the relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. "Admiral von Holtz," Finch continued, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "His command ship was with the wolf pack. It was damaged. He didn't make it." The architect of Lorelei was gone. The threat was neutralized. Finch reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single, slightly battered white rose. Where he had found it in wartime England, in autumn, she couldn't imagine. He placed it gently on her desk, atop the pile of intercepts. "A little vanity," he said, a genuine, weary smile finally touching his lips. "For the artist who out-artisted the master." Tears filled Elara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, of release. She stood up, her professional composure completely gone. "Alistair," she whispered. "They're giving me a week's leave," he said. "God knows I need it. I was wondering if you might be able to get away. To London. There's a little pub I know. The fire is warm, the whiskey is passable, and nobody talks about codes or war." It was an invitation into his world, the real world, an offer of something more than a partnership. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'd like that very much." He offered her his arm, a gesture from another, more chivalrous time. And there, in the heart of the secret world, surrounded by the machines that broke the unbreakable and the people who turned chaos into order, Elara Vance, the cipher, took the arm of Alistair Finch, the spy. They walked out of Hut 8 together, not as rivals, not just as colleagues, but as two people who had broken the most difficult code of all, the code to each other's hearts. The war was far from over, but in that moment, they had won their own private victory.